All right, well, welcome to the Unseen this week. Welcome back, and yeah, just welcome. Just gonna have some uninterrupted eye contact. Just kidding. I just felt goofy. All right, so welcome to the Unseen with me and myself. Today we are going to talk about Daniel chapter 10. So we are in the Daniel series, and if you've been sticking along, following along, watching, listening, studying, hopefully, I would encourage you to study because it's wonderful. Last week, of course, we talked about Daniel chapter 9, and I guess you could say, finished up an unofficial sub-series in the Daniel series, which was the question, do we still need angels? So I finished that up, kind of a part 2 of that, so I'd encourage you to listen to it. This week, we are talking about Daniel chapter 10, and we'll just call it the rules in the unseen. So let's talk about it. All right, so Daniel chapter 10. The rules in the unseen. So I just kind of want to mention, like, Daniel chapter 10 is probably, 10 through 12 is probably my favorite part in the whole book of Daniel. And I'll tell you a little bit about why in a minute. So what I want to focus on today, outside of when I kind of go through what the chapter is about, is the rules in the unseen. So in the spirit realm, I'll just say it this way to start. Anything goes isn't a thing. Like, so you think of, we have rules in like physics and things that science teaches us about, like the laws of just our existence on the physical realm. So, basic things like gravity. When you jump, you fall. Like, it's a part of just, the laws of existence. When you are born, you begin aging from the very beginning. So it's like these things that are just a part of our laws. So what I want to just kind of hit on a little bit is that in the spirit realm, there are rules. It's not that they do exist outside of the physical, so they are not bound by our rules. And because we live in, I'm about to go on some really weird tangents, but I'm going to try not to. We exist in the dimension of time. So time has a flow. It does have a beginning and it does have an end. We're just not at the end yet. The passage of time and the way we experience it is a dimension that the spirit realm, specifically God himself, does not exist within. So he's completely outside of that. So the spirit realm operates out of a different set of rules, but there are rules. And so I just kind of want to hit on those a little bit and to talk about some interesting things that Daniel 10, I believe, paints a pretty good picture of. So let's talk about, I'll give you the synopsis of what's going on. So in Daniel 10, there's going to be a couple spots we'll read out of. Excuse me. So he's in the kingdom of Persia at this point, Daniel is, and this is where he is mourning. It says this in verse 2. He says, "In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks." So little tidbit, and I'll try not to go on like a rant with this. But this is where we get the Daniel fast, mostly. The 21-day Daniel fast, if you're familiar with that kind of thing. I despise that stuff. If you love it, there's nothing wrong with following those things. I love fasting. Fasting is vital and important, and it's a part of our Christian life. Jesus even talks about it as a given, just like giving, like finances is a given. Just like prayer is something that is a vital part of our Christian life, fasting is just as much a part of that. So if you don't fast, I'd encourage you to take that step and begin. But I do not like the standard, this is how we do it, because there's one example in the Bible where it shows something. Now, some people have great revelation on that and they practice those things, and it's not wrong to do that. So let me say that. It's not like wrong and I'm saying this is sinful. I just get weird about stuff where we make things like this big deal, like the Daniel fast is something very spiritual. It's not. He was mourning and was fasting in that time of mourning for 3 weeks, 21 days. I would guess Now, maybe I'll learn otherwise, but at the moment, this is what I think. I would guess that he would have been fasting longer than 3 weeks, except that it was on that 21st day, or the 21st, or at the end of the 21st day, that he had the encounter that ended the fast. So there was nothing specific, and we'll talk about that detail in a minute. There's nothing specific about the fast that said like 21 days was special. This is just the day he reached before the breakthrough came, as well as the specific things he was fasting. I just get weird when we make it like very specific, as if this is the rule you have to follow versus being in relationship with the Lord and letting him tell you what he wants you to fast. Now, sometimes he doesn't give you details like that, and it's just up to you to decide like where you're at in your heart, what you want to fast, just what might feel right, or the steps you want to take yourself, outside of him giving you specific instruction. So I've made videos on fasting previously in the unseen, so I'm not going to go down that road. But anyway, this is where we get the 21-day Daniel fast thing, except it's not called the Daniel fast. Daniel wasn't doing the Daniel fast. Okay, moving on. So he's fasting, he's mourning, he's having a hard time basically, and you can read further into that. So he has this encounter where there's other people with him actually, and it says that none of them saw it. They just felt a quaking and then they ran away. But Daniel saw it. He was having this encounter, but the important part of that detail is this wasn't something that Daniel just dreamt, or that was in his head. This was something that other people that were with Daniel experienced something happening that was very fearful. That is a validation that this encounter Daniel had was very real. So they just didn't see it or hear it, they just felt it. So Daniel is having this hard time, he's mourning, he's fasting, and then it says suddenly he lifted his eyes and looked. So this is the part I'll read. Yes, this is the part I'll read. And then here's the thing I want to talk about that's interesting, and if you're like a studious type, can be controversial, but oh well. Verse 5 and 6 says, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. I don't know if that's how you say it. Verse 6, his body also was like the barrel, as in a gemstone, not barrel like a barrel of ale. And his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. So this is the beginning of the encounter, and then it goes on. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that's the beginning of the encounter. So here's the thing that I want to point out. I believe that this is actually Jesus. And I'll tell you why some don't think this, and I'll tell you why I think it is. So I believe this is Jesus. Now, further down, and this is where a lot of us are familiar with this teaching, and he said that, he says, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to chasten yourself before your God. So the first day. So he's been mourning and fasting for 3 weeks now. And this encounter, this being, who I believe is Jesus, says, from the first day that you set your heart, I am come for your words. He said, your words were heard, and I am come for your words. So he said, from the first day you started, we're responding, we were on our way. He says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, so Michael we know is an angel. Some call him an archangel. Doesn't really matter for this purpose. It says, one of the chief princes came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. So he says this, and he says that he needed Michael, who we consider an archangel, had to come and help him, because the prince of the kingdom of Persia. So here's the distinction I want to make. Prince, and I won't belabor this because this isn't the main thing of what we're talking about. The prince of Persia, they also use the term prince for Michael, who was an angel. Excuse me. And we know that because he's referenced more than once. So oftentimes, though not always, sometimes the word prince is used for this heavenly being, something that is not human. This isn't talking about princes that are specifically like you have kings and princes of a kingdom. That's a whole nother teaching. We will talk about that in the unseen, but right now we're not going to spend more time on that detail. But this is specifically talking about a spiritual being. So we get into, you might be familiar with the idea of like principalities and these rulers. And so in the New Testament, you often see that used in a negative sense. So the prince of Persia withstood him. So the argument against, I'll give you that first. The argument against this being Jesus, who needed Michael's help, is that how could the Son of God, one of the Trinity, the creator of the universe and all of creation, how could he have needed help against a lesser being? So that would be the argument. Like, that's not possible. Of course that's not possible. But I would actually argue that it is. So we know that though it didn't use a term that would give you a clue that it was Jesus, and I'll go into why it's possible that the Prince of Persia could have withstood him. Second, I'll do that second. But first, I'll make the case for why I think it's him based on what is said. So we already read it in verse 5 and 6. And then you see in Daniel's response to his presence in Daniel in verse 7 down through 10. So anyway, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I encourage you to do this. So write this down or go back at a later point and study this. That in verse 5 and 6, it talks about how the whole description of him. And then if you read in Revelation chapter 1, when John encounters Jesus, and this is specifically Jesus in Revelation 1. So there's no arguing that fact. It is Jesus, the glorified Jesus, in Revelation chapter 1. That the description that John gives for Jesus is very, very close to the same as we see right here in Daniel chapter 10, verse 5 and 6. So it says that, like, he's clothed in linen, okay. The loins, the only difference here it says the loins were girded with fine gold, and maybe it's the same and it's just a difference in the way they described it. I don't know because I'm not an expert on their wardrobe of the day. But in Revelation, it says that across his breast, he was girded with a sash of gold, or however it says it. So that's like slightly different, but kind of not. And then it says in verse 6, his body was like the beryl, so a gemstone, and his face is the appearance of lightning. And those two, I would say, those are not connected to Revelation 1. But if you go to Revelation chapter 4, there's some similarities that are not the same. But anyway, I'd encourage you to study Revelation chapter 4. And then it says this, his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in the color to polished brass. So in Revelation 1, it says very directly that Jesus' eyes were like a flame of fire. So same. And his arms and his feet like the color of polished brass. And Revelation 1, it talks about how his feet were like burnished brass, as if they were on fire, like they were shining like that, but they looked like brass. So same. And then the voice of his words, like the voice of a multitude, kind of sounds like a tiny difference from his voice like many waters. Because what does all that sound like? This loud, crashing, overwhelming sound, right? So it's like the same description that we get for Jesus in Revelation 1 is given right here in Daniel 10. And there's not really like other angels described like this. So there's not like a host of other beings that have the same description that we see for Jesus. Some of them have some similarities, but not the same. Where this is like really close to the same. But again, and we've talked about this before, that before Jesus was birthed as a human in Mary, his name wasn't Jesus yet. So he's not given a name here. Sometimes we see like Son of Man or like the Son of Man or things like that in the Bible, but and he shows up in a lot of places in the Old Testament without a name. But that would take a whole in-depth study to go there. So this is Jesus before he had the name. Now, I'm going to hit on the rules, and this is kind of the main point. So he was withstood by the Prince of Persia, and I'll kind of wrap up with this. They say it couldn't have been Jesus because who could withstand God himself? But here's the thing. Until Jesus died and was resurrected and exalted, it says that this in the New Testament, that God the Father gave Jesus, he exalted him, and he gave him the name above every name, and he had all authority and all dominion and all that stuff, that whole list of things. But until that point, he did not have all authority. When the fall of man came, and I'll try to go quick here, because again, if I go into all the details, we'll be here for a long time. That from the fall with Adam and Eve, that we had all authority, we had the dominion, but from that fall, we gave that up. So from that point until Jesus died and rose again and was exalted, all that whole thing, until that point, we no longer had authority and dominion. And so here in the Old Testament with Daniel, we see the Lord, who I believe this is Jesus. And at this point, he did not have all authority. So again, this would be a further study and video. And I don't know if I've talked about it in these videos before, but in Deuteronomy chapter 32, depends on your translation. So in my King James translation, it actually translates it wrong, where my paraphrase is this. God is talking to Moses, and he's saying, like, I've given, this is my paraphrase, all the sons of Adam, so humanity, that I've given them to as the inheritance, or however it says it, to the sons of Israel. So that's what my Bible says, and a lot of translations say that. But a lot of translations do not. And the original, like, Dead Sea Scrolls kind of thing does not say that way. It actually says that he gave the nations to the sons of God. And so this is a description that goes into how when the nations were split, that he actually divided them and gave authority to these fallen heavenly beings, we'll say, the sons of God. Now, another reference that you might be familiar with of that term is Genesis chapter 6. So the other nations, except for Israel, because then he says right after that in Deuteronomy 32, he says that, but I reserved Jacob unto myself. So Jacob is the nation of Israel. So what he's not saying is that he numbered and gave the nations to the sons of Israel. That's what some translations say, because it changes the whole meaning. That can be, well, not going to go there. But what it really says is he gave the nations to the sons of God. So all of that is to make this point, that authority of the other nations was given to other beings that was not God, that was not Yahweh. And so at this point, Jesus, or the Word, the Son, did not have all authority. And so God actually, these are the rules of the unseen, authority and dominion are very important. So now we live in a time where we have all authority, and I'll probably talk more into that in another video soon to kind of hit on authority and stuff like that. Because I actually think we really don't understand it very well. Anyway, he did not have all authority, so that the Prince of Persia, who had the authority over that nation, was able to withstand him because it was his authority over that space. And this was not the nation of Israel. This was Persia. This was a different kingdom. And the Lord, so God did not actually have the authority to enter that. So he was withstood by the one who did. Now then there was the battle. Michael came and helped him, and he made his way through. And the battle was still going on, though, because then it says that he had to go back, and the Prince of Greece was going to come, and so another being was going to come withstand them, basically. So the whole point is to say this, that I believe that was Jesus, and so that's why I love 10 through 12 of Daniel, because it's this whole encounter that Daniel's having with the Lord himself, and it's powerful. I love it. So I'd encourage you to study that. But that there are rules in the unseen. You know what, next week we're going to talk further in this because I don't want to go too long. So we're going to talk further into the rules of the unseen. But I'll leave you with this, that authority and dominion matter. And what used to be in the Old Testament is different now, but there are still rules and there are ways that things operate. And I think it's important to understand them, or at least have a growing understanding of how God himself has ordained things, how he has set things in place, and that there are rules that we follow, there are rules that the spirit realm follows, and there's an order to things, because God is very much so a God of order and structure, and there are rules. And not rules in like the religious sense, but just like the rules of design and creation. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Next week we'll go further into that because there's a lot more I want to say in that area. So rules in the unseen. Jesus in Daniel chapter 10. It's powerful. I love it. Anyway, if you have any questions on that or curiosities in that direction, I'd encourage you, please ask them in the comments below, and I'll try to get back to them. All right. Have a good day, night, evening, whatever. I'll see you next week. Love you guys.